Welcome to the Hunger for Change podcast, where we unwrap fresh ideas and the big shifts happening in health and science. I'm your host, Niklas Gustafson, and today I'm thrilled to chat with Anya Fernald, a true innovator in the world of sustainable food. Anya's 2-decade journey in the food industry has established her as a leading entrepreneur in the field. She's the co-founder of Shakewell and has rich knowledge on sustainable agriculture and ethical meat production due to her past entrepreneurial endeavors. Recognized by Inc. magazine as one of the 100 female founders and named by Food and Wine among their 40 under 40, Anya has certainly carved a niche for herself. Her insights have captivated readers from the New York Times to the New Yorker, and she brought her expertise to the big screen as a judge on the culinary battles of Food Network's cooking shows like Iron Chef. She's also an author with her cookbook Home Cooked, offering everyone a taste of her culinary philosophy. It is clear that her work not only influences the culinary world, but also promotes a sustainable and transparent food system for all. Without further ado, let's welcome Anya. So thank you so much for coming, Anya. Great to have you. I'm really excited. First of all, what does health mean to you?
Health is waking up every day, being able to do everything you want to do, having your body have that capacity.
I agree. That's important. So could you tell us, what's your story? How did your passion for regenerative agriculture and culinary arts all start?
I became interested in food at a young age, and I have a couple different ideas around the genesis. It's more around a family dynamic than around health specifically, but it was a way that I could help my family and to really kind of pitch in and solve a problem in our home as a child. I also was very attached to my paternal grandmother, who was an amazing cook. And I saw the way that my Granny Kit could draw people in around her and just was kind of the lifeblood of her community through her cooking and her food. And I also loved that she always had something homemade at the house, which is unusual in the U.S., I think.
Yeah, is it unusual?
And she had moved to Florida, and she always had cookie dough in the fridge and always had pies. And she actually put herself through college. She graduated from college, which is rare for a woman in her time frame,
really?
In the 1930s. And she had put herself through college baking pies and selling pies. So she was a real entrepreneur and food person, and I just adored her. She was the most feminine, wonderful woman I'd ever met. So she taught me a lot about baking, which is still something I love to do. And I then sort of began to explore cooking a lot. And I got into making cheese. I worked professionally as a baker. And I also was an athlete. I was a competitive rower in college. I always ran track. I was very interested in fitness and wellness. And so interested in feeding myself. And like many kind of kids of the 90s, I did the no fat thing. I did low fat. And eventually I ended up in Europe on a fellowship studying cheese making. And I started eating tons of raw milk and cheese and salami and bread and all the things I thought I couldn't eat. And my health improved radically.
Where was that, in Europe?
So first I went to the UK. I wanted to learn commercial cheese making in my own language first. So I went to Wales and I made a cheese called Caerphilly, which is a traditional cheese that's very salty. It's a cool story. I love the way that cheese ties in with culture. But in that area of Wales, they were all coal miners. So they're mining coal, and it was very, very hot. So this cheese was a very salty block of cheese that you would take with you into the mine, and it would help you. It's like an electrolyte, right? So like a lot of these traditional foods have like an interesting role. So they would take Caerphilly into the coal mine. So I made Caerphilly in a town called Llangollen in Wales for a month or two. And then I went to Tuscany and I learned to make pecorino on a farm outside of Florence. And I traveled to many different dairies, but I just ate what people ate. And I remember first thing I learned was that it's very normal to be hungry for a long time during the day, right? And I got used to being hungry, which for an American, very unusual.
Right.
And then when I ate a lot of fat and a lot of animal products. And my hair, I stopped getting split ends. I stopped getting yeast infections. My dental health improved. I had cavities that then during the course of that year disappeared. I went to the dentist before I left and they were like, you're going to have to get this dealt with. And then when I came back, it was gone. Wow. Acne cleared up. Just and my body smell changed, like got better, like a bunch of weird. I'm giving too much.
No.
All these, like as a woman, these kind of key indicators really rapidly changed, and all in the right direction. I was thinner, more energy, and lots of little like indicators. I think we would think of them now. The language would be like they would be inflammation indicators.
So you were in the north of Italy, and also in around Florence, and then you mentioned that you were in Sicily.
Yes, from that year of cheesemaking. So I had a fellowship. I spent a year traveling with the money from that fellowship, and then I was hired by a company in Sicily to support them in marketing their products to the United States and to Europe. And I was in a town called Ragusa, which is in southeastern Sicily. It's quite famous now. It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
And do you know the cheese Ragusano?
I haven't been there. I have been on Sicily, Taormina, I think it's called. Yeah, which is beautiful. Very touristic though, but yeah. So you managed to find? Did you manage to find raw milk there? Because it's not that easy in Europe to find raw milk. That's not permitted.
Raw liquid milk is not very common. I wasn't at the time, I think since I've had children, I have been more interested in liquid milk sourcing.
Yeah.
By the time I wasn't drinking much liquid milk.
Yeah.
And also in Sicily, it's quite hot. So there's not much of a tradition of liquid milk consumption.
Yeah.
In hotter cultures, you have less of the liquid milk.
Yeah.
Born on a raw milk dairy in Bavaria.
Yeah.
So I grew up drinking raw milk from a young age, and
Okay.
I didn't seek that out for my kids. But I think I wasn't looking so much for raw milk specifically, but I do seek out fresh raw milk cheeses for sure.
Exactly. You can find quite a lot of fresh milk cheeses, but to find the fresh milk itself, that's harder because it's not allowed to sell basically in Europe, within the European Union.
I think we forget, there at the time when raw milk was really effectively outlawed, tuberculosis was a massive problem. It's so interesting because the whole landscape of animal illnesses has changed radically since then, but the laws remain the same, right? So we're sort of solving for different issues with the hygiene and sanitation systems that we have now, as well as like phytosanitary testing and controls. I would think Europe, of all places, could do an excellent job executing raw milk. But I was actually in Europe. I lived in Sicily at the time when the EU was born, right? I was there
in the mid-90s, right?
Well, I would live there in 2000, 99 till 2000. So like I was there in that time when all those regulations were implemented. Yeah. And it was, I think it was differentially really hard for places like Sicily just because of their traditional foodways being less well documented, procedurally less accurate. So I think there was a lot of like raw milk knowledge and that type of product that was effectively they did a better job there than they've done in the US of preserving traditional foodways, but it was really challenging, I think, to keep traditional products the same level of like natural interaction with the environment than that we have we've been able to build more of in the US in some ways without having ancient products that need to be outlawed, but people building HACCP protocols around traditional production systems, right? That makes sense.
Anya, could you share your journey from Europe back to the US and how your experiences abroad influenced you and influenced your perspective of food quality?
I was forever changed by living in Europe. I was forever, my expectations for my human health were forever changed. And also my expectations and my understanding of food. And it's actually in some ways been difficult because I came back with such a different perception of how we should eat and cook. And in some ways it was like I'd found a calling. I'd never really had understood when I would think of like barbecue culture in the US with like lots of flavors and lots of salt and lots of spice, that didn't ever work for me. But when I lived abroad and I just had really clean ingredients cooked very simply, I loved that food and I thrived on it. So I actually kind of went the other direction. I mean, within a couple of years, I was a judge on Iron Chef for many years. And honestly, although I enjoyed the show, it gave me some exposure. It was fun to go to New York. I was in my 30s. I would get very sick after the show. I would fast for like 2 full days. people would ask me, oh my gosh, you're so lucky you get to eat all that great food on Iron Chef. I was like, I would be ill. I would be unable to function. And I would get a brain fog and sleepiness and just really it would blitz me. So I just realized that for my physiology and for how I like to run and like to be in terms of a peak performance for myself, that simpler style of food was just more effective. I think we've seen it now. There's been a really big change in the world, and there's been the rise of farmers markets, for example, lots of ranches selling meat direct, artisan dairies. I want to share, though, one experience like this, which is that when I first moved back, I was really principled about access and justice. That time, I was a really fiery activist, and I'd been working with these very exclusive products in Europe. And they're not exclusive there. They're peasant food there, but they were things that were only sold like in the equivalent of like Italy in the US, right? And so I came back thinking...
And they're exported to the US?
Yeah, I mean, the types of products that I worked with there when I was at Slow Food were all very high-end, Batarga and high-end...
Pecorino.
Yeah, like fancier products. And I really wanted to make a difference like in actual food justice and nutrition. And so I came to the US and I started working in my home state of California in a statewide farm to school program. And I honestly gave up. I think it's something people should understand how difficult it is in the broader American agro-industrial system to create change. I had a budget, I had USDA funding, I did a lot of different projects to really get better fresh food into schools. I'm sure I made a tiny, tiny difference. What I learned is that when you're talking about whole populations of people that only have access to very limited food sources, live in food deserts, do not understand fresh food, we would be dealing with issues like people not understanding how to eat fresh fruit. We'd have issues with fruit being like products that were being shipped to schools being rejected because it had leaves on it and people thought it was damaged. So it was a really big lesson for me that unfortunately, although I tried to kind of dive into mainstream food and create change in that world, it was too systemically different from the place I come from and the knowledge base that I had to really create any change.
How do you think the restaurant industry can better promote health through its, through what it offers?
Unfortunately, the highest margin foods in restaurants are the least healthy. Because the more you can rely on ultra-processed ingredients, the better your margins are. Remember that to make money in a restaurant, you need to spend less than 15% of your COGS are on your ingredients. So it means for every $100 that you spend at a restaurant, the maximum that restaurant can afford to spend on their ingredients is $15. It's a really challenging, and that's not because people are greedy or something, and restaurants make terrible margins, right? Like, so even although they're only spending $15 for every $100 of food, and that's like the very limit you can spend. Most restaurants that are more profitable are spending just $10. So think about spending $10 at the grocery store and what you can get for $10. And then think about what you can get at a restaurant for $100. So what's the gift? It's the ingredient quality. So unfortunately, with cost of labor, taxes, regulatory overheads, all the things that go into rents, it's so complicated to make money. The risk, and nobody is making bank, and people go into it with the very best intentions, but you're squeezed at the margin.
Yeah.
The definition of being squeezed at the margin. So I think for restaurants, and then you could say, well, why don't they do things like, cheaper things like beans that are whole foods and can be very healthy but are low cost? Then you're talking about employees and labor to soak things and prepare things, right?
Yeah.
So it's I really rarely eat out at restaurants. With my kids, I will eat out at like things that we really can't make easily at home, like Thai food or sushi as a special treat. But I find that I understand why, but the use of seed oils, the use of lower quality ingredients, unless you're the very, very, very top, it's very difficult to source quality. Now, it can be a fun experience. It can be a cheat day. Pizza's amazing. I actually think pizza is one of the best things to get outside because it does have very inexpensive ingredients. So it's like, if I'm going to do it, I'm actually going to go for things. I'm going to go for a higher price restaurant. I'm going to go for something where I know the ingredients are just intrinsically less expensive, because I'm more likely to get higher quality.
For us, it's the same. Me and my family, we when we go out to restaurants that maybe not Thai food, as you mentioned, because Thai food here, at least here in Spain and Europe, it's a lot of sugar. The sauces are like made with a lot of sugar, and but I mean, when we go out, usually it's like fish and seafood or meat restaurants where you know they can't really cheat. The quality is like high, good quality food.
Yeah, I think it's also really challenging with kids in particular. You want people to have agency, but then the menus are structured to make poor choices in the same way as the grocery store. I don't even take my kids grocery shopping with me. I used to.
Yeah.
But I don't, because it's like the cards are stacked against us making healthy.
Totally.
By the way they set the store. So my kids are a little bit older. They'll be at home. I'll go out grocery shopping. I'll take them to the farmer's market, no problem.
Yeah.
I'll take them to the butcher shop. But a place like going to in the US, like a Costco, where I'm going to go in laser and buy the couple things that I know are high quality there that I really love and rely on, or a Whole Foods, it's so stacked in a way that your kids are going to make bad choices. So feel like sometimes in life, it's like teaching your family and yourself to make great choices in a complicated environment. And then there's other places where it's like the same reason I'm not going to take my 7-year-old jet skiing. It's like, it's unlikely to end well. So I'm just not going to do it, right?
Yeah. So what about the food industry? You mentioned that it's hard to get the numbers right. It's the margins are, I mean, high quality food, the margins are really low. So where the margins are, well, it's processed food, processed refined carbs, refined sugar. What steps do you think that the food industry can take to combat obesity and inflammation? Because that's the result. I mean, having these refined products and ultra processed products.
Well, it's a challenge because those products have been shown to be addictive. And it's like, how are we going to change the industry that's producing effectively like an opioid, right? Yeah. Like an opioid effect that those foods have on people. And I've seen it in my own family and plenty of people who told me this, you get on Doritos and that kind of food for a day or two if you're on a trip, and then breaking that habit is extremely hard. Yeah. Whereas breaking like the fresh orange slice habit is not hard at all, right? Like, so it's very difficult.
I agree, and they know that. That's where they want you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's like fear is going to be the bigger driver towards healthier choices, and I think unfortunately there's not going to be like, I'm not sure if it's a push or a pull. But people are not going to be just making good choices because they're good for them. I think fear around obesity, fear around diet-related diseases, these are going to be the things that actually drive change. And I think that the next change that's going to happen is these Ozempic and Mounjaro, these drugs that have been heralded as like, panaceas, solve all, no consequences, are also going to be revealed to have massive issues. And you're going to have to just make the changes. I think one thing that's interesting is like the appeal of radical diets in the United States in particular has always been very intriguing to me. We love extreme diets. And I used to be judgmental around this in a way, thinking, oh, Americans, like when we do monster trucks, the trucks are 40 feet tall. And when we do games, it's like everything has to be big and blown out. But I've changed my thinking around this, and I now see the preponderance of these like extreme diets in the U.S. and the success of extreme diets is that we're so addicted to hyper-processed foods that we need like a full reset.
So could you mention, I mean, an example of a really extreme diet?
Carnivore, keto, veganism. These are all extreme diets. They involve social compromise. You can't be with your friends in the same way. Yeah. They involve like shopping in different places. They involve cook a different way. Yeah. And these are the diets that are seen as like the most effective in the US. So you have to ask yourself, like, why is just eating less not very effective? Right. And this is where I think there's a tendency towards being judgmental and saying, well, it's because Americans lack willpower, et cetera, et cetera. But I think if you see us as an addicted population, and we're truly addicted to hyper-processed foods and to the dopamine cycles that those processed foods create, well, then these extreme diets are just effectively different ways to remove hyper-processed foods from our diet.
Yeah.
And so then with that removal of hyper-processed foods, we actually get a reset and we have a chance to let our palates actually build a real appreciation. Yeah. And you think too, I mean, another major issue I think is the lack of cooking in the US. And I'm a passionate cook. I mean, I learned to cook on farms and I love sharing cooking and teaching people to cook. But the biggest part for me about cooking is like smelling food as it's being made. And there's a huge, I think, olfactory component to hunger and satiety, where if we are letting ourselves smell food and smell food being prepared, there's a much easier jump to satiety than if we're just cramming something that has no smell, because there's like a whole buildup. It's like a seduction. There's a conversation. And if you go to a European grocery store, it smells like food. You smell food being prepared. You like smell cheese melting. You smell fresh vegetables. Same with the farmer's market here. But in American supermarkets, they smell very sanitary.
Really? Okay.
And they smell very clean. They don't smell like food. I was once in Africa years ago, and I don't know how true this is in general. So if this is a cultural mishap, I apologize in advance. But I was amazed because they actually used cow dung underneath the vegetables. And they said, I asked about it, and they were like, it makes things smell better. And it did. It smelled really intensely like papaya because there was all this like compost effectively. It was dry dung. It wasn't like wet or something, but it was like it kind of amplified the smell. So I think in a lot of traditional cultures, we spend the whole journey of like making a meal. You know, go even in Chinatowns in the U.S., you go to Chinatown, the fish market smells like fish. The vegetables smell like vegetables. So there's a whole journey that you start when you're buying food, you're smelling it, you're anticipating it, you're thinking about it, then you cook it. There's the garlic roasting. There's the smell of the onions.
I agree. It's very much a part of the experience. So Anya, you have a new company. Could you tell us a bit about your, it's called Shakewell, is that right?
Yeah, it's a fresh liquid whey-based protein drink. So we're using liquid whey from Raw Farm Dairy, which is a raw milk provider here in California, based outside of Fresno. And they produce a beautiful quality milk and beautiful cheeses that are all from, they just keep the herd extremely clean. Basically, they wash the udders before they milk them. They get this very high quality raw milk. It's sold only in the state of California, where it's legal to sell raw milk in grocery stores. And we're taking their raw liquid whey and we're making it into the base of a protein drink.
So you can only sell it in California? That's the only state in the U.S. where it's illegal to sell raw milk?
Raw milk you can sell within the state of California. There's a few other states that it's legal in. It's the different levels of laws around it, but California is remarkably permissive about raw milk. So we're using the whey from that dairy.
Yeah,
we pasteurize it because keep in mind, whey has already been heated during the cheese making process. So the benefits of rawness in the whey are lower. And we're adding really high quality grass-fed whey isolate to that to make a drink that is liquid whey and additional whey protein, and it's 30 grams of protein. And the liquid whey is amazing in that because it's a natural preservative. So we don't need to use any preservatives in the product. It still has shelf life of over a month, refrigerated.
So is that 30 grams of protein in how much? Is that a bottle?
8 ounces. But it's 30 grams of protein, and the idea is it's a, morning drink that you'd have. Yeah. Many protein beverages, at least in the U.S., have lots of stabilizers and gums in them. Yeah. And because the whey naturally has an elevated pH and it has lactic acid, which is a postbiotic, it also has lots of other great kind of micronutrients associated with high quality dairy and like IgG and things like that. And the stabilizing effects come from the pH and also just the natural protein content of the whey. So the product isn't gummy. And it's just, whey is not used. We don't make ricotta here in the U.S. in any volumes. There's not many whey-based cheeses. I'm sure in Spain there's some great whey-based cheese, but there isn't in the U.S. not really doing it.
Okay. So what inspired you to create this company? Are you the only, is that the only product on the market? Or is there any competition?
There's no competition for a liquid whey-based protein drink. For me, it's as a woman, I'm 49 and I eat a lot of protein, but as I get older, I'm less interested in like killing steaks all the time. And I definitely eat a lot of meat. But oddly, my preferences are just towards lighter, leaner proteins. I'm super active, but just the kind of, I get weighed down by heavier things. So I love the idea of approachable protein. And I like to get 60 grams of protein before noon. I try to get in that zone for my health vitality. So my business partner, Luke Cook, is an actor and a wellness influencer, and he is we're joined at the hip on this product. But our goal is to create something that's a very clean protein supplement, basically, that you don't have to worry about having all the gums and other kind of additives in it.
So what are the health benefits of consuming this product? I mean, you do get a lot of protein, like clean protein. Is it easier to digest than a steak, for example, if you compare it?
I'm not the right person to answer that. I think that whey protein is, when nutritionists say it's among the highest quality, cleanest, I think egg whites, whey, are the easiest for your body to assimilate. I still find that, whey for me at least, it's a very easy to assimilate. I don't have I can work out after I eat it. Whereas if I eat a chicken breast, I cannot work out after I eat it. Yeah. So it's also just, I think for those of us looking for protein quickly, there should be an option that's doesn't involve like huge compromises.
So, I mean, comparing an industrial dairy, processed dairy versus this product that you offer, what is the difference?
The protein content in liquid whey from artisan dairies is definitely higher. We've seen that. And in general, just the presence of any byproducts from industrial dairies are lacking. So there's no contamination in feed or other things. I think the biggest benefit of the product is simply the fact that it's using liquid whey and therefore does not need a preservative. It doesn't need any stabilizers in it. So it's the absence. Yeah. Typical protein drinks, at least here in the US, have 25 or 30 ingredients. So what I see is that the liquid whey gives us a chance to scrape like 10 ingredients off that list.
Okay. And you need to keep it refrigerated, right?
Yeah. I mean, liquid whey is perishable. Whey is the byproduct from cheese making. So in cheese, in milk, you have two major proteins. You have casein and you have the albumin. And the casein protein is what we make cheese, caseus, right, in Latin. Yeah. And so the way that rennet works is an enzyme that causes the long casein proteins to coil up. And as they coil, they trap fat molecules and they create a gelatinous matrix, and that is curd. So when we're making cheese, we basically get all the casein proteins to go from long whatever those are, to coils. Imagine springs or like a slinky with your kids. And then in that, they're trapping a bit of albumin protein, and they're also trapping these big, fluffy fat molecules. Then we heat that. So we heat that product, this like light matrix, we cut it and we heat it. What happens when we heat it? These large, loose coils of casein protein, they tighten up, right? Think about meat. When you cook meat, the proteins contract. So these big, soft coils turn into like little like ringlet coils. They get tighter and tighter and tighter. And the more we cook it, the more those coils tighten up. So a cheese like a pecorino, we cook very quickly. The coils are kind of still. A cheese like a Parmigiano, we cook a long time. And so those coils become very, very tight. As they tighten, they expel. Okay, they expel moisture. And in that moisture, they also expel the albumin protein. The albumin protein is a different beast. It does not react to the enzyme of rennet. So once the cook of the curd has happened to the degree that needs to happen based on how long you want the cheese to age. Very simple correlation. The longer you want the cheese to age, the tighter you make those protein coils. Why? Because water carries bacteria, and and water is also a substrate where the bacteria and any contamination can thrive. So if you want to take a cheese to a much longer age, you have to squeeze out all the water at the cooking of the curd. So cheeses like Gustafson, in very traditional cheese, aged 5 years, cooked into oblivion. It is almost powdery, okay?
Yeah.
So you basically cook the curd, you squeeze out as much water as you need, and then what's left? It's like this magic liquid. It's the water. It's called like the whey is also called whey water, but it is very, very rich in everything else that was in the milk other than the casein and the fat. Okay, so all the magic of milk, all the health benefits of milk, things like calcium, lactic acid, tons of other micronutrients, IgG, etc., all of that stuff, and there's literally dozens of things that are naturally occurring in milk, end up in the whey. Where does the whey go? In big dairies, it goes into making dry whey powder. In small dairies, it goes into the water supply. It gets disposed of, or it gets to pigs. It's very effective in helping animals, like as an inexpensive animal feed.
Yeah.
Okay, so but it's like the magic juju of milk. There's so much goodness in it. So liquid whey traditionally was used for lots of things. In Roman times, it was used as a bath. Like people would actually soak in it for their skin quality. It was used as a vitality tonic. People would drink it. And then in the US, it was used as a cooking liquid. I don't know about Spain, but in the US, it was used like if you're making beans, you soak the beans in whey. If you're making pie crust, you put whey in. I make my sourdough bread at home. I bake my own bread, and I use my whey in my sourdough.
Okay.
And most dairies add whey powder most bakeries add whey powder. If you look at like lots of commercial breads, it'll have whey powder in the ingredient list because it helps the bread become more structured and last longer. So it's got preservative functions in bread as well. So whey is kind of this it's like a sort of a forgotten ingredient that I think deserves a look. It used to be across the U.S. like people in the summertime would just add a bit of sugar to it and just drink it cold as a refresher.
Your products they come from grass-fed. The cows are grass-fed, right?
Yes, they're grass-grazed, which is different. Yeah. In California, year-round grass is challenging for dairy, so there's not very much pure grass-fed milk here. But they're grass-grazed. They're all pasture.
Grass-grazed, all right. So how does the diet of the animals affect the quality of in this case, the whey, the product, but also meat and all kinds of byproducts?
Well, it's really interesting for me thinking about animal diets and product quality as it relates to human health. I think we would like there to be this line where it's like the animal eats healthy, so you're healthier when you eat it. But unfortunately, it's totally non-linear, like most traditional processes, right? You follow me? Like the benefit things like building a stone wall with your hands. It's like it's not what exactly is great. It's like it's great to be outside. It's great to be lifting things. It's great to move things that are different shapes and different sizes, right? So when we think about what's the benefit of gardening compared to working out at the gym, it's a non-linear answer. The answer is there's a bunch of different things that all matter, and you don't totally know why. Right. So I'm answering that saying I don't have a good answer. And the reason that I've thought about this a lot, I've talked a lot and reflected on it. And I wish there was this leads to this. So if I look at what are the different factors I would consider in evaluating the extra whatever dollars that you're going to have to spend per pound or per gallon, the number one thing is that grass is healthier for the animals if they're ruminants.
You mean comparing to grains, like a grain-fed animal, corn and soy and wheat, right?
Totally. So grass versus grain for ruminants and lambs and beef, primarily goat. And then in the case of pigs and chickens, access to the outdoors is the more important factor. And then in all of these animals, in the U.S. at least, what we're also talking about is not eating things like leftover candy, right? You know, it's legal and common to feed.
Yeah, it's crazy.
M&Ms and Skittles and terrible stuff, right? So it's not just this versus that. It's this better quality versus a whole universe of things you can't even imagine, including feeding plastic shavings to ruminants as a source of additional fiber. Mm-hmm. So the biggest thing you have to think about is animal vitality and animal health. So this is the first part of the kind of non-linear connection, right? So the better, what I think of as an evolutionary diet is going to have a direct connection to improved animal health, right?
Yep.
So then it's also who cares? What does that matter to me? What does that matter to numero uno? That's what we all want to know. And the answer is we don't exactly know. We don't. But here's what we do know. Those products do have higher micronutrient density. They have typically higher protein. They sometimes, depending on the animal breed, have higher fat, which may be something you want or may not, depending on your personal diet, etc.
And the ratio omega-3 and omega-6 is also very important, right? When it comes to grass-fed. And
that is very important. I mean, there's the omega-3 to omega-6 is huge. That one is also complicated because in my experience and my study of the data on that, there's plenty of ways. There's supplements that can achieve that in animals. And there's also plenty of like things that are considered legally grass-feeding animals that do not yield high omega-3 ratios.
Yeah.
So you can feed pellets, you can feed hay, you can feed other things and not have a good omega-3 ratio. So you need to, unfortunately, you need to ask for or organize yourself testing around that.
Yeah.
Because it's not a guarantee that grass, if you're sure that the animal is fed and finished on green grass, yes, you're absolutely sure that there's higher omega-3s. If it just says grass fed on it, you're not totally sure of that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think, though, the connection to between animal wellness and human wellness, you have to have a certain degree of comfort with a lack of data around that. But I think there's many kind of micro points of data that suggest that that's the case.
And also, I mean, not just for ruminant animals, but also for chicken, right? Chickens fed corn and even soy and wheat, they get a very high omega-6 profile. Chickens should eat like anything that they can find on the ground, including insects and worms and anything, right?
Yes, I think when I'm looking at chicken, I'm always looking for the length of time between when it's born and when it's slaughtered as an indicator of quality. So what that tells you is how much movement it gets. And so if I'm looking for, in the case of ruminants, I'm really interested in what is being fed. Yeah. Because what it's being fed also indicates where it lives. It's a package deal, right? So it has to be out for most types of. In the case of chicken, it's easier to fudge things, honestly. It's easier to call it free range, at least in the US, and then it doesn't actually have what you consider like a pasture lifestyle. So you really need to look for slow growing and like an heirloom breed.
And when it comes to, I mean, when you say slow growing, how slow? You know, because I heard that chickens today are raised in a couple of weeks only.
2 to 3 weeks is what you can raise a true commercial chicken in.
Yeah.
Slow growing would, for me, be 8 to 10 weeks.
8 to 10 weeks, all right.
And I mean, that's an incredible difference.
Yeah.
Like 3x. Yeah. Insane. If you think about what it would mean for you personally to gain 10 pounds in a week compared to 10 pounds in a month.
Yeah.
How much more would you have to eat and how much less would you have to move? It's like a parabolic curve of like getting that much weight gain in a compressed time.
Yeah.
So think about what that means for the animal, how little how much they're eating. Yeah. It's also stress related. It's very interesting with chickens in particular. There is a very strong connect, actually pigs as well, with cortisol levels and the weight gain. So they're actually creating on purpose a very high stress environment, which causes effectively like an inflammatory response in those animals.
So why do you want this stressful environment?
They gain weight faster.
They gain weight faster, okay.
It's like humans, you know, if you're competing for food, competing for, you know, you're under huge social stress, mate competition, and no contact with loved ones or anything like. We gain weight too, right? We all do. It's this exact same thing for animals. But unfortunately, you know, I think we see plenty of healthy people on the internet who are living off of very, very low quality chicken breasts, right? Who look great and are very lean and have bodies that we would all aspire to. So it's a real challenge, I think, for people to make the connection between animal health and human health. It's, in the case of chickens in particular, it's more complicated. It has to do with things like tetracycline and other immune suppressing antibiotics being in the water supply, right? Yeah. When those are in the water supply in adjacent communities, you have much higher risk of things like infant mortality. You have higher risk of like uncurable influenza outbreaks. So there it's like a very soft connection, unfortunately, between animal wellness and human wellness.
Yeah.
And I think you have to, like, in your approach to meat sourcing and dairy sourcing, it needs to be a bit of a global view. You need to have a look at, like, I'm looking at wellness, not just for me, because honestly, I could switch to eating low quality chicken breast and it wouldn't taste as good. I would not enjoy it, but I doubt there would be any meaningful health marker changes for me were I to do my blood work 6 months in, right? Yeah. And I eat a lot of poultry. So I can't make that claim. But I do think if you look at a broader view and you look at things like contamination of the water supply, people who live within 3 miles of confinement, pork operations, it's something like double to triple the infant mortality rate. They've been shown that there is very high incidence of tetracycline and other antibiotics actually aerosoled in the air for the humans around it, because those antibiotics are often applied aerosoled within the hoop houses where those animals are raised.
Really?
So there's very meaningful human health impact. So you do need to look at it and also think for yourself, COVID was a result of poor animal husbandry. Right?
Yeah.
Swine flu was, avian flu was, there's like all the bad diseases were basically industrial agriculture.
They come from there. Yeah.
So if you think about it from a like global to local perspective, you also need to think about, like, when's the next mega epidemic going to happen? Well, it's if you look at the past 20 years, the next mega epidemic, the next COVID, is absolutely coming from industrial animal agriculture. 100%. Let's be supporting of an alternate reality also in light of that.
So, Anya, when you talked about the grass-fed and versus grain-fed, can you explain the concept of rotational grazing and its significance, in regenerative agriculture practices?
Every regenerative agriculture practice is based on an understanding of ecology and natural evolution of the interaction between animals and their environment, which is one way of looking at ecology as a word. And in the case of rotational grazing, the ecological system that's being modeled is that of ruminant herds of hooved animals moving seasonally to follow grass. Where you live in Spain, there is a very traditional version of this called the trashumanza, right? They still call it trashumanza. Yeah, they go from the low to the high.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the springtime, they will go up. They'll go down to the valleys in the fall. I forget the direct motion, but basically you're following the grass from low to high. And what you're doing then is taking your domesticated animals on a journey that's very similar to what their primitive ancestors would have done. So if you look at that as animals traditionally used to move with the grass and go where the grass was greenest and eat that grass. Why? Yeah. New grass has high sugar content. That's, we don't eat tomatoes off of last year's vines too, right? You want the fresh fruits from the freshest products. It's always going to be the sweetest. I guess the example we'd have of that is like artichokes. You can only get artichokes one time when they're fresh, and then they get woody and old. They're not
sweeter,
right? So we as farmers, as ranchers, would model that by taking their animals in the olden days from pasture to pasture. Okay. So when you're looking at rotational grazing, if you have a fixed set of land and you don't have a mountain and you don't have a shepherd, what are you going to do? And maybe your land all matures and is all exposed to the same weather pattern. Most farms are like that. So how do you replicate that? Well, you create times of rest on certain pastures and times of fertility on certain pastures. And then you move the animals from the resting pastures to the fertile pastures. That's it.
Okay.
You're effectively, instead of walking the animals up the mountain, you're creating a section of your pasture that's as if it's an April bloom, in the valley, and a section of your pasture as if it's a July bloom at the top of the mountain, right?
So the grass is sweeter. Does it have more omega-3 as well?
Have higher omega-3s. Grass only has omega-3 fats. Yeah. Seeds have omega-6s, grasses have omega-3s. So there's no fat ratio within grass.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's a fluctuating amount of fat in grasses based on seasonality. I can't imagine that there is.
Okay.
But you're going to get animals tempted to eat the grass when it's greener. It's going to make them fatten for market better. They're just like, their animals are super picky about feed too, unless they're stressed and hungry, right? The more wild an animal it is, the more intuitive it is about its eating. So goats and sheep are the oldest domesticated animals, and they're the ones that behave the most like wild animals because they were domesticated so long ago before we knew how to really domesticate the heck out of animals. So these older animals, these older species, goats will self-medicate by eating foods very high in antioxidants. If they have a parasitic outbreak in their stomachs, the goat herd will actually all go and eat the equivalent of like the arugulas and the things that have these really naturally antioxidant loads.
Could you, Anya, tell us about your typical food staples at home? What are your food staples at home, and how does your diet and your family's diet look like?
We have no ultra-processed foods, and that's the biggest kind of tenet. So I do most things from scratch. I ferment, and I make fermented hot sauce, fermented sauerkrauts, and I cook from scratch every day. Yeah. Also, the baked goods that we have in our house, apart from a few exceptions, are all made from scratch. So I make cookies, and I make breads, and I make cinnamon buns. My kids eat a lot of that. I eat less of that, but we make it all from scratch, and I let the kids participate in that.
Nice.
The biggest, and then it's kind of like a neat thing too. Like they're really proud of the fact that we always have homemade blueberry muffins. Like they're really into that and excited to share that with their friends. And it's always a big deal when their friends come over and they're like, "This is the best X that I've ever had, and it's homemade." So that's been a really nice thing that they're proud of. Like my kids are proud of the cooking.
Yeah.
But the biggest parts of my life that are different, I think, than standard households is buying direct on really key ingredients.
Yeah.
So for me, that's my flour and my olive oil and then my meats. So everything else is farmer's market and wherever else, fishmonger, etc. But my olive oil, I buy direct from a company that sources from farms called Amphora here in the U.S.
Californian olive oil?
I buy it. I am €2 in my olive oil taste. I developed a palate for Sicilian oils. I buy Nocciola oil from Sicily, but I'll buy like 30 gallons at the harvest and keep all year. And that makes a huge difference. Everything tastes better. I don't cook with that much oil, but everything tastes better with high quality oil that from one farm, and then no palm oil or anything in it. Whereas it's kind of haphazard with olive oil if you're always buying it, and it's also really expensive to get really high quality. So if you can put out the $800 or so that it takes to buy a year of really good quality oil and buy it up front at the harvest, it's such a good investment.
Actually, I do exactly the same thing. I buy the olive oil directly from the farmer, half a year consumption.
And there's plenty of good stuff in California too. I just prefer kind of like there's just a flavor of a certain type of olive that I love, but there's a lot of California producers too. So I think just buying that direct, knowing that 99% of olive oils in the U.S., according to the last book I read about it, maybe the numbers have gotten better, but 99% is cut with palm oil or other seed oils. So you really have to be careful.
Yeah, I agree.
The other piece is flours for baking. Most of the flours in the U.S. are treated with anti-mold. They often have, there's major issues with E. coli contamination in flour in the U.S.
So what flour do you use?
I buy directly from a place called Maine Grains, and it's an isolated region of the United States. It's in Maine, in a place there's not much commercial farming, so there's very little Roundup and genetically modified spraying, and I buy direct from there. There's a couple mills like that. Anson Mills is another one, but I go for a geographically isolated area because there's no contamination with sprays, and it's stone milled flour. And I have the experience of like when I cook with that, and my friends who are like gluten intolerant or gluten free even, and they try a bite and they're like, didn't bother me, because it's like a lot of the inflammation is just around the other things that are in American flours.
Okay.
And then I get my meats directly from a ranch in Montana called Tangent Draw. Beautiful product.
Organ meats as well?
I don't cook with too many organ meats. Back when I ran a meat company, I did a lot because I was also selling that. But I find liver, I adore. Heart, I adore. Kidney, the rest of it, it's a little bit much for me.
Sweetbread is my favorite.
Oh, yeah. You can't really get those in the U.S. How do you cook them?
Really? Well, first I leave them for like 2 or 3 hours, like slow cooked. And then I slice them and put them on the grill with salt.
You slow cook them like in salted water?
Sometimes I do, but yeah, I just put them on the grill, sliced and thin, and then some salt, and then I mean it's really easy.
I like to do them whole on the grill, like soak them for a bit, wash them, soak them just in cold water, and then do them low and slow on the grill.
Okay.
For hours and just get them crispy as the fat renders out. You don't add anything to salt, and then the fat renders out and serve it with lemon.
So what effect do you think exposing kids to growing their own food and cooking together has?
I think it changes their understanding of like agency and what they can do. I think a lot of kids are locked into an idea of like making food is X. I cook a lot on the open fire. I expose my kids to that. I like to bury things in the coals. I like to grill, I make everything from scratch. And I like the fact that it kind of opens up the range of what's possible. Because so much we think about food is like we just heat it up or we microwave it or we do this one thing to it. And it's like with sports. Like if you think that the only thing you can do is go on a rowing machine, you're not going to think about like a boat in the ocean. So you have to give your kids the boat in the ocean mentality around food, because then food becomes a source of joy, or it can be a source of joy.
Do you have any favorite dish, or I mean, is there any dish that your friends and family begs you to cook all the time?
Oh my gosh, yeah, my brisket. My son wrote an article for his school paper about my brisket. That felt like a special.
So how is it? How do you make it, the brisket?
Cook it, and I just put a rub on it of whatever's inspiring me: fresh garlic and herbs, and then usually some paprika, and then I'll put it in the oven for 6 hours.
6 hours?
Yeah, and then just let it go low. And so I do it usually with a bison too, a bison brisket, so it's pretty lean. It gets really, really tender, and they love that. And then also bolognese sauce, like all the time, like yummy, meaty, complicated. And it's also, I think in that case, this is where I've really gotten fixated on this idea of smell, because those are dishes that my kids freak out about, and they ask me to make the bolognese for lasagna, or they make the brisket. But when I make the brisket for the whole Sunday, the house smells like that. There's this whole like thing, everything is so exciting. They like come in and they're like, "Do you smell it? It smells so good." It's like a build up. And that's like, I think part of the joy, is like the whole anticipation and the excitement, and then the actual eating of it's almost like an afterthought,
Any new exciting projects coming up that you're working on?
I mean, launching this complicated whey-based drink has taken all of my bandwidth. I've been nobody's commercializing liquid whey. Yeah. And so figuring out how to build a supply chain for that and getting it from the dairy, and then how to handle it and working with regulators on getting that approved has been really exciting. But it's like anytime you're cutting a path through the bush, you are kind of like, this is why nobody walked this way before. It's very clear, it's like a lot of my time. And then the other thing has just been on my social media. I've been getting so much interest in really traditional fire cooking, which is like a huge passion for me.
So how is that, the fire cooking? Do you use like a barbecue, normal barbecue? How does it, what does it look like?
Just a pit.
Okay. A pit.
Like it's a local It's a company, Sea Island, that I work with. And I've done it on lots. I also have I live on an acre and I've got fire pits around. Like I just build fire rings. But I like to challenge people to so much of food online is just like, keep it simple, like so simple, so reductive. And it's like, it takes away all the sensuality of the process. And I don't understand why you'd remove the sensuality. I mean, listen, I'm selling a protein drink. I get where sometimes you just need to cut to the chase and get what you need in your nutrition. But if you're going to go to the trouble of cooking a meal for somebody you love, I would want to take the whole experience of it and really enjoy it and make it into something that can be really, everybody now is looking to kind of fill their cup emotionally, and social interactions are down, and all these bigger societal factors. So for me, I love the idea of spending time around traditional cooking and traditional food making. Because it fills my cup. And I think there's people out there that could just get so much from savoring that, having it be a chance to be an artist and to be a creator. And then also liberating yourself from this idea that you have to put tons of flavoring to mask things. Instead, figuring out ways to exalt the base flavors as opposed to needing to like cover up and mask stuff with tons of seasonings and vinegars, sugar, and all that stuff.
So when you mention open fire, what do you, is it meat, or do you even do you do vegetables, fruit? Because I love to do like meat and also peaches or fruit on the barbecue. I love that.
I do a lot with burying vegetables, like burying root vegetables. Anything that grows underground, you can bury it as well in the fire.
Yeah, okay.
So bury
I don't do okay.
Carrots, beets, celery, all of those things are amazing, of course. But that's been really fun. And whole cabbages. I also like to like take cabbages and stuff them with things and then wrap them. Also take cheese and wrap it in cabbage and bury it. So just like the most primitive way possible. And then with meats, I've done so much of that over the years, and I really enjoy it too. But I love to do things that are more about like preparing meats in different ways, so like butterflying it, rolling it, and cooking it, hanging it. It's just like taking the coals as like your kind of your canvas and thinking, what can you do with a simple, like how do you make the simplest thing possible into like spectacular? That kind of like is the paradox that I love to play with. That's just like my creative outlet.
Anya, where can people find you? You mentioned your Instagram account.
Yeah, I'm at Anya Fernald.
Yeah, I follow you.
I follow you. I love your stuff.
Thank you so much. Okay, so people can find you on Instagram, and what else? Do you have any YouTube account as well?
I do. It's all the same handle, TikTok, but mostly all the normal socials. And then Shakewell is at Get Shakewell.
Okay, great. We'll add the links to this post. So, anything that you think that I didn't mention or you wanted to talk?
Well, I want to take a moment. I've listened to your podcast a couple of times in preparation for this, and I want to say thank you. You know, you're carrying the torch. There's not many people talking about really traditional food and being brave in the way that you are on your feed to kind of own it and eat very classically and do it with a lot of gusto and courage. And I look at your stuff and I'm inspired by it whenever I see it, and I feel like you're an ally in people, you know, returning to origin and doing things in a more simple way. And also, honestly, we had to say it, it's like, it's more expensive. You have to prioritize spending money on food to do this. And some people don't see that priority. And it's like, you're courageous in saying, hey, this is worth the money and try it.
You understand that in the long run, to spend more on quality food is an investment in health, right? Thank you so much. I appreciate very much, Anya, that you took your time to talk to me. And talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Hunger for Change podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I also wanted to take a moment to talk about Naturally, my brand of healthy food products. At Naturally, we are on a mission to change the world through what we eat. This is why we worked so hard to make products that are delicious and also good for you. They're all gluten-free, have no refined sugars, no sweeteners, and no additives. At the moment, Naturally is only available in Europe. However, we're working to expand to other continents, so stay tuned. If you're in Spain, you can head over to our website, naturally.com, and it will take you to our online store. And if you're in Italy, Portugal, Germany, Poland, France, the Netherlands, or in Sweden, you can find them on Amazon. I will leave you all these links in the description anyway, so that you can find them. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.